The following podcast is created and sponsored by High Beam Ministry.
To its shame, the United Nations has long been a hostile place for the state of Israel. Both the current and the previous Secretary Generals have objected to the UN's disproportionate focus on Israel. It's a wrong that undermines the credibility of this institution, and that in turn is harmful for the entire world.
For decades, the international community has been saying that any change in the status of Jerusalem can only come about as part of a negotiated peace deal. So for now, all countries with embassies in Israel keep them in or near to Tel Aviv, and they just have consulates in Jerusalem. But President Trump is insisting that he does want to move his embassy to Jerusalem. And he's also said that he's pursuing the ultimate deal of peace between Israel and the Palestinians, although he's not committed to conventional ways of achieving it.
America will put our embassy in Jerusalem. That is what the American people want us to do, and it is the right thing to do.
Therefore, I have determined that it is time to officially recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel.
We will move the American embassy to the eternal capital of the Jewish people, Jerusalem.
The President's decision is an important step towards peace, for there is no peace that doesn't include Jerusalem as the capital of the State of Israel. President Trump, thank you for today's historic decision to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital. The Jewish people and the Jewish state will be forever grateful.
Welcome to the Erzatz Coffee Shop. This is Jay, your Truth Barista, and I'm serving up a steamy cup of God's truth for the average Joe. You can catch me and this podcast on my websites, truthbarista.com, all one word, truthbarista.com, and highbeamministry.com. That's HIGHBEAM ministry.com, as in car high beam. We're shining the light of God's truth on the road ahead.
Truth Barista, it is so good to see you. But I'm again a little frustrated.
Why?
Well,
Why?
Because Raul, you know Raul.
Yeah,
from Big Brain University. I mean,
Yep.
he comes in and...
So what's he stirred up this time?
Well, he's just stirred up about the fact that Israel, Jerusalem is being given back as the capital to Israel by our president.
What, like they don't have it as a capital already?
Well, it is, but it's not actually
because of the recent decision by the president regarding moving the embassy. Yeah, I get it.
And so Trump was going to move the embassy to Jerusalem, as we all know in the news, and he just says that's a very, very, very dangerous position.
Well, I remember you were talking about this a couple of weeks ago during our Bible study break here.
Right.
Okay, I've got a surprise for you today. You see, I've got some friends who work in a ministry overseas in Jerusalem.
Oh, is that couple over there in that far booth?
Exactly. I was just going to introduce them to you anyway, so I'm glad you brought that up. But Steve and Cheryl Hauer, that I'm going to introduce you to, the Reverend Dr. Cheryl Hauer. You're going to love this couple because they can give you so much on-the-ground, truthful insight, biblically, politically, historically, they will answer your questions.
That's what we need.
So come on over. I'll introduce you to them. Grab a cup of Joe, okay? Hey, Steve. Hey, Cheryl. How you doing?
Good morning. We're doing great. How are you?
How's the coffee?
Best coffee in town.
Wonderful stuff. Hey, get him another slug from that wonderful jug there. I'm just saying. Okay, amazing, Larry. This is Steve, and this is Cheryl.
Well, nice to meet your acquaintance.
Nice to meet you,
Larry. We have some questions about this whole Jerusalem thing, and I couldn't figure anybody out that would be better to talk about this than you guys, so thanks for coming in. Could you tell us a little bit about yourselves? So Steve, go ahead. Tell us.
Okay, well, we are with an organization called Bridges for Peace. We've been actually serving in the international headquarters of Bridges for Peace in the city of Jerusalem for the last 10 years. So, Larry, do you know anything about Bridges for Peace at all?
Yeah, I know a little bit. I mean, that by the name itself means that you're trying to create a peaceful sort of coexistence and with the Jews and the Gentiles and whoever else, I guess.
Why don't you sum it up?
Well, we are a Christian organization, actually, that's dedicated, Larry, to building relationships of peace, yes, of friendship, respectful, sincere relationships between Jews and Christians. Christians. And we have actually been in the land of Israel for over 50 years as an organization.
Now, don't you guys also do humanitarian work too among the people?
We do, actually. That's one of the ways that we express Christian friendship and love to the Jewish people is through our humanitarian projects. So we provide food to somewhere between 20 and 30,000 people a month. We have, I think, about a dozen different projects that are designed, yes, to actually provide humanitarian assistance, but primarily they're tools for, on the one hand, Christians to say to the Jewish people, you are not alone. Christians are standing with you. And on the other hand, for the Jewish people to recognize those things. They are not alone. There are Christians around the world that are supporting them.
And I would think that you're well received. You're not a political organization. You're not there trying to proselytize, right? Are you well received?
We are actually quite well received. Now, again, we've been in the land for over 50 years, and we weren't maybe so well received to begin with, but a lot of things have happened, and a lot of it's happened just in the last decade, where things have really changed. And, there was a time when if I was having a conversation with a Jewish person and he found out that I was a Christian, suddenly there was a wall that would begin to go up. Because, of course, our history has taught the Jewish people that maybe Christians aren't their best friends. Mm-hmm. But now, if I'm having that same conversation and they find out I'm a Christian, which, of course, I'm very open about, most Jewish people want to shake my hand. They want to say thank you. They say we don't know how to express our appreciation because we're coming to realize that Bible-believing Christians are the best friends that Jews have worldwide.
And isn't that a relatively new phenomenon within the church? Because, like you said, we've got a rather checkered past with Jewish-Christian relations, with the anti-Semitism and the pogroms and, the Christian veneer over some of the Nazi Holocaust stuff. And all of a sudden, Jews are going, why do these people love us? And they're kind of amazed.
And a little uncomfortable sometimes. Yes, it is a very, very new phenomenon. Of course, when Israel became reestablished as a nation in 1948, it was a bit of a challenge to the Christian church because most of the church was steeped in what we call replacement theology, which of course was a theology that said that God was done with the Jewish people. Israel would never be a player on the international stage again. And suddenly the church came face to face with an incredible prophetic act that placed Israel forefront. They had to figure out how to deal with that. And so they either had to ignore it, they had to stand against it, or they had to support it. And the supporting took a little bit longer, but it has been growing. And now over the past decade, it has really grown with, I would venture to say, millions of Christians worldwide that are coming on board to support the nation of Israel.
And one of those other prophetic milestones is not just Israel becoming a nation, it's the fact that Israel took Jerusalem as its capital in, 1967?
Mm-hmm, yes.
In June. And that was a major milestone. Jesus himself said that Jerusalem will be trodden down by the Gentiles, in other words, under Gentile control, until the time of the Gentiles is fulfilled. Mm-hmm. So when the city has come back into Jewish hands, suddenly you have to realize the times of the Gentiles is in its descendancy, and the time of the Jews is in its ascendancy. Why? Because I believe prophetically, as I read the scriptures, and I am the Truth Barista, that God is preparing the world to receive the Jewish Messiah in fulfillment of those prophecies. Mm-hmm. And he has to have a people, he has to have a land, he has to have a city, and he's going to have a place for his throne.
Mm-hmm.
So, Truth Barista, just a quick question. If all of this is true, why so many churches have very little to do with talking about Israel to their congregations?
I think it goes back, and check me if I'm wrong, Steve, and Cheryl here, what is it because of replacement theology? You just kind of, Israel is not a part of the picture, so we don't deal with Israelology, so to speak, in our seminary training and Bible school training. But now all of a sudden we're faced with that, and that is a major component that must go back into our pastor preparations and our professor preparations. Do you agree?
Absolutely. Absolutely, yes. The replacement theology is probably the single most difficult issue that organizations like Bridges for Peace, who are trying to bring the message of biblical mandated Christian support for Israel into the church, have to deal with. And it goes all the way back to probably the 3rd century, where it really began to come front and center in Christian theology, and has been the standard as far as theological training and how the church should relate to Israel. And it's heresy.
Tell Larry why Jerusalem is so important biblically. Let's start there. I mean, this is a major issue. Where does it have its foundations of becoming important?
I think that God made Jerusalem the spiritual center of the world. Mm-hmm. And it has been in a number of different situations throughout the year. It's been conquered something like 18 times. It's had a very, very difficult history. And that's because I believe God has said, this is my city. And through this city, prophecies of God revealing himself to the nations would actually take place. Mm-hmm. So it's a critically important physical place, but a spiritual place as well.
An important thing to note, I think, is that in spite of all of those centuries of the city of Jerusalem being conquered, handed over to other countries, other rulers, and so on, there has always been a Jewish presence in that city.
That's a key point.
Yes, absolutely.
You know, I was just reading through Ezekiel, and there's an interesting scripture in Ezekiel that says that Jerusalem is the belly button of the world and the apple of his eye. And I'm thinking, well, the belly button is the connecting point between
Absolutely.
the creator and the created. I mean, and if you really look at the whole world, Jerusalem is ground zero. It is the connecting point of God's life to the entire creation as he's calling them back in redemption. Because look at Jesus ministered, died, and created the core, the essence of God's redeeming work there in Jerusalem. Mm-hmm. So this is the connecting point with the Creator, and yet we have forces that are trying to cut that connection and to remove us Christians from being connected to Jerusalem and Israel and the Jewish people, and ultimately, I think, the Creator.
Mm-hmm. Well, and there has been historically those that have believed that the Messiah, when the Messiah returns, he will return to Jerusalem. You know,
no. He's
not
going to
come to
Tulsa.
Minneapolis. I'm sorry.
Or
He's not coming to Tulsa. He's not coming to Springfield, Missouri. You know, he's not coming to Sydney, Australia, or Paris, France. He's coming back to Jerusalem.
Why?
So there have been movements throughout history that wanted to stop that from happening. Mm-hmm. And we're seeing a lot of that today. And of course, if Jerusalem doesn't exist, if Jerusalem is no longer a Jewish city, then perhaps they can interfere with that move of God and keep it from happening.
So what you're saying is ultimately this is a deeply spiritual issue, and all of the geopolitical stuff we're watching and the historical things that have happened is basically the veneer over the underlying spiritual cause.
Absolutely.
Well, I was just going to say that Raul, when he was in this morning, said Jerusalem should be a neutral city. It shouldn't be owned by anyone because there's three faiths that claim Jerusalem as their city. So that's why he's so upset over the fact that, you know, the Jews are making it their capital.
Because there's a threat that the Jews are going to stop Christian worship and stop. I mean, that's the canard, the false accusations that's floating around out there now, right? I mean, mm-hmm. Is that what you guys have heard in Jerusalem as you've lived there? I mean, is that a common thought, or is that a threat that some people say?
Well, it's a common threat. It, however, is totally false. And historically, we have evidence of that. During the time that Jerusalem, between 1948 and 1967, when Jerusalem was under the control of the Jordanians, there was absolutely no freedom of worship. Christians were not allowed to come into the old city, to the Christian sites. They were not allowed to go to the Western Wall. The Jewish people were not allowed to go to the Western Wall. Jewish synagogues all throughout the Jordanian areas were completely destroyed. There was no freedom of worship whatsoever. Since 1967, 50 years ago, by the way, this is a big year. It's the 50th anniversary taking the city of Jerusalem. There has been complete and total freedom of worship. Christians, Jews, and others that might want to come and visit the holy sites, go to the Western Wall and pray. Total freedom of worship. Mm-hmm. So that accusation has historically been proven to be false.
I've often shared with Larry as we've talked about the whole Israel prophetic thing. It's fascinating that God started with Abraham and he grew him into a people, and then he took that people and he put them in a land, and then in that land he gave them a city, and in that city sat a king. And we're all about, as we study the Bible, we look for patterns. Well, think of this. Out of the Holocaust God took a people, and then he took the people and he gave them a land, and then he took the land and he gave them a city, and now what's the city waiting for? The city is waiting for the king. So the spiritual enemy of our souls is trying, as you said, to prevent that. This is an underlying spiritual issue.
Well, speaking about people waiting.
I know, I see the cue.
Well, we just got to rush again. So we'll come right back to your guests here in just a moment.
Oh my gosh, this Truth Barista is really great. I have learned so much from him, so I have been inviting more of my friends to join me in coming here to the coffee shop. Great coffee and great conversation.
Well, hello there. How can I help you?
Could I have a caramel macchiato, and could I get some extra caramel with that?
Well, certainly. I see you around here quite often. Do you live in the neighborhood?
No, but I like your coffee. And on Fridays, I kind of sneak in on that little Bible study back there in the back booth. I kind of sit on the other side of the booth and drink my coffee and kind of eavesdrop.
Ah, that's where I've seen you as well. Well, I enjoy those discussions. It's really a lot of fun.
So what's the tip jar all about?
Well, it's our way of helping the Truth Barista kind of cover the expenses of this free study. He comes in and does this, and we put it out on the internet after the study is over, and other people really around the world can enjoy what he has to say. So the donation tip jar is just a way for people to help him do all of that.
Well, that makes sense. I've actually gotten some pretty good things out of just sneaking back there and listening. I think I'm going to probably do my part too.
Well, thanks. That helps a lot. Well, here's your coffee, and if you want to stick around a little bit, the Truth Barista's got more things to share.
Sounds good.
Oh, man. Hey, thanks for the coffee. That's good. Did you guys get your refill?
Good coffee.
Okay. Once again, Larry, we're here with the Reverend Dr. Cheryl Hauer and Steve, or Steve and Cheryl Hauer, as you want to put it. And by the way, notice we didn't have angels sing at that point?
Yeah, I wonder why.
Yeah, it's kind of a weird thing.
Huh.
Anyway, moving right along, we're talking about answering your questions regarding Jerusalem, and we had talked about the spiritual aspect of it. Could you guys tell us a little bit about the history? I mean, how does this play such a cornerstone in history? Why is it important to us?
Well, the first thing that I think people need to realize is that you cannot separate the geopolitical from the spiritual. You can't separate from what's happening right now before our eyes from the spiritual, from what God has said that he prophetically would cause to happen at some point. Well, you know what? We are very much at that point. Now, Jerusalem has been the capital of Israel for over 3,000 years, actually.
Really?
And, for people to assume that it just happened in 1948 or it just happened in 1967, read your Bibles, people.
I know, I was kidding about that, really, because who was the first one? Here's your first test, amazing Larry. Who was the one that first created Jerusalem to be the capital of Israel? The clock is ticking. A certain king?
Cyrus?
No. Back a little farther.
Played the harp.
Oh, David.
Very good. Ding, 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 ding. There you go. Okay, so take it from there.
Well, yes, it was King David that actually purchased the land and established Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. And again, it's all there in the Bible. If we just read the Bible and let the Bible say what it says, rather than being influenced by that concept of replacement theology, where we can read the Bible and say, well, I know it says this, but it really means this. No, it says what it means.
See, and that's the problem with some of theology today, is they look at the Bible and say, oh, it's not a historical document. It is simply the product of faith and whatever somebody believed about something at a time. No, it is a historical and a spiritual faith document, and we need to take it, as you say, for what it says. In fact, many archaeological finds lately, and I'm getting this through Bridges for Peace's material, The Dispatch from Jerusalem and the Teaching Letters, which, by the way, you can pick up at www.bridgesforpeace.com. Okay? Would you like that little pitch there?
Very nice.
Okay.
Thank you.
But archaeological finds are constantly popping up, confirming the historicity of the Bible.
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
Names, locations, etc.
Just to give you a little example of the truth of that, in Israel, there are really two kinds of schools for children. There are religious schools and there are non-religious schools. And of course, in religious schools, they study the Bible, they study the Torah. In the non-religious schools, they study the history of Israel. But guess what their history book is?
The Bible?
It's the Bible.
That's so cool.
It is cool because it is, yes, it's a very spiritual book for Christians and Jews, but it is also a history book. And we need to read it in that way. And when we do, we see that Jerusalem has had a very checkered past. It's been a very, very difficult place to live because it has been conquered and it has been freed, and it has been conquered and it has been freed. And again, I think it's something like 18 times.
So what you're saying is by the evidence of the battle over Jerusalem, it proves the importance of Jerusalem to the world.
Absolutely. Okay. Absolutely.
Yeah, because David had it, and then I think it was about 700, 800 years later, the Babylonians came in and conquered it. Then after 70 years in exile, King Cyrus, which, by the way, issued a declaration very similar to President Trump.
Absolutely.
In fact, many people are looking at President Trump as a new Cyrus. The king of Medo-Persia, Cyrus, said, go home. Rebuild the city, rebuild the temple. Okay, so that went on for the next, 500 years, and we're into the time approaching Jesus, and one faction of the Jews were fighting, of the kings, the Hasmoneans, and they said, hey, come help us, Romans. So the Romans said, oh, we'd be more than happy to help you. And they walked in.
It's kind of like the fox in the hen house sort of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So about 63 years before the birth of Jesus, the Romans took power, and they put their puppet in place, Herod. And then now you've got this Roman-Jewish kind of situation that was a nice tension there. But then it kind of blew into an open rebellion, and the Romans sacked the city and destroyed the temple in AD 70. And Israel's been kind of floating in the diaspora for those almost 2,000 years.
Yes. And that's, the cry of the Jewish heart for 2,000 years has been next year in Jerusalem, has been a return to the nation of Israel, return to that city, which is their spiritual center. All throughout this last diaspora, it's been a very, very, and the Jewish people have suffered tremendously, even though they were out of the land. The diaspora has not been a comfortable place for the Jewish people to be, except in the United States. The United States has actually done quite well. Maybe a couple of other, Australia, a few countries like that the Jewish people have done well. But for the most part, the diaspora has been a very uncomfortable place. Lots of persecution leading up to the Holocaust, which was the ultimate in horrendous persecution of the Jewish people. And throughout it all, their cry has been to return to God's city, to return to their spiritual center.
I was watching a clip from Schindler's List actually the other day, and it's the very, very end where all the Jewish people have been released and Schindler has gone off to escape prosecution, and they're all just sitting there. And one soldier, I think from the Russian forces, rides up, and it was funny because one of the Jews stands up and he says, "Where should we go?" Just this plaintive voice because their home has been destroyed. And the soldier looks at him and goes, "Well, you can't go east because they hate you there, but you can't go west. That doesn't work either." And so in my mind, instantly what filled in is, go south.
Yes, go south, young man.
And that's what happened is at that point in history, God flipped the switch and he created a homeland for the Jewish people. And you can't have a homeland without a capital. And yet the capital is under struggle. And now all of a sudden in our day, how amazing this is. In our day,
yes,
we have seen one of the most premier prophetic events to ever occur, on par with many of these others, the exile and all these things that God has promised. We're, in a sense, if you've got kind of an end times mindset, we're kind of on the cusp of some very big events.
Does the average Joe Israeli really think this is a good idea of, the moving the embassy and that sort of thing? I mean, generally speaking, or is there a lot of pushback in Israel?
Well, first of all, Israel is an amazing culture. There's always a lot of arguing and debating and that kind of thing going on amongst the Jewish people. But overall, the Jewish people are absolutely thrilled. There is an element that isn't so thrilled, but they are absolutely thrilled. And President Trump has sort of secured his place in Jewish history as a prophetic individual, a friend of Israel when in the nations they felt they had no other friends. So, yeah, there have been huge celebrations at the Western Wall, celebrations all over the country, actually, just rejoicing. And, of course, very happy with President Trump. But what they're really, they're rejoicing, thanking God that God has raised up if you want to call him another Cyrus. He's raised up another means through which he is fulfilling his prophecy.
And yet in Western news, Truth Barista, we hardly ever see that joyful sort of celebration. We always see the negative of
the constant lamenting.
The Palestinians everything is so terrible now that Trump has done this.
Now, you've lived there for 10 years, and you've lived there until just recently. How has been the reaction on the other side, the non-Jewish side that you've seen, especially as, there were the rumors going out that Jerusalem was going to be declared the eternal undivided capital of Israel?
Well, in spite of what you see in the media, Truth Barista, it's business as usual.
Really?
Yeah.
Because you'd think that the entire place was in an uproar.
And it just simply didn't happen that way.
Okay.
Granted, the Palestinians aren't happy, but they're never happy. So
now you're talking about all the Palestinian people, or some of the Palestinian people in the government, or the authority, the PA. What are you talking?
Well, we'll say the authorities certainly are the ones that are vocal about it. But the man on the street, he pretty much does what he's told by his leaders, and that's it. But they're not getting any instructions to go out. I mean, they called for a day of rage.
Okay.
Yeah,
we've heard about those.
We have days of rage periodically. This is something that they just do. They don't like this condition or that condition, they being the Palestinian
so they throw a temper
leadership.
tantrum.
So they say, let's have a day of rage. And so they literally, in their own enclaves, gather together and shake their fists at the sky and
burn
tires and this sort of thing. But it doesn't really reach outside of their own community.
And it doesn't really have much of an effect?
It doesn't have any effect. It doesn't have any effect politically. It doesn't have any effect on their neighbors so much.
But there is an effect, because that is picked up by the media, and it's not just the Palestinian media, but it's sympathetic Western media, and it's more for a photo op and to sway world opinion against Israel and those that support them.
The really interesting thing that happened this time with President Trump's announcement was, again, the Western media picked up all of this and ran all of this footage about all of these demonstrations and so on from the Palestinians, certainly in Jerusalem or in Israel, and in other Arab nations throughout the Middle East. However, the footage that they actually ran is documented as old footage from previous events. It didn't happen that way this time. It was not, I won't say a non-event, but it certainly wasn't the earth-shattering event of negativity expressed by all of the Arab nations that the Western media was portraying.
So let's see. If we take old footage and we use it for a current news event, we're not really dealing with news, we're dealing with propaganda.
Exactly.
Yes.
Oh.
Exactly.
So if you see stuff coming out of a certain wing of the media, etc., we should probably look at it with a jaded eye and really question it.
Absolutely. Christians, well, everybody should, but especially Christians, because this is so important to Christians.
Okay, and in order to get the truth, I go to a number of trusted websites that really do carry the truth of the on-the-ground situation, and that's the value that I've found with you guys at bridgesforpeace.com. That's bridgesforpeace.com. Because you guys are on the ground, you do the teaching letters, you do the dispatch from Jerusalem, and I've read that dispatch, and it's wonderful. And it has all of the up-to-date quotes and news stories from, right there as it happens situations.
Truth Barista, something else that we have that is so valuable for Christians, and that is we have a weekly prayer update that Christians around the world can receive in their email. And what we do is look at what's happening, look at the stories that are in the news, and we send those stories out without the media bias that you so often see.
And you don't edit those, do you?
No.
They just come right off the wire?
We find the ones that don't have the media bias, that are really telling the story the way it should be told. And we add prayer focuses to help people understand the heart of what's happening in Israel, how they can pray intelligently. And we include scripture verses as well. And that's something that's available to Christians all over the world. That's one way that they can actually stand in support of Israel, is to pray.
Well, Truth Barista, I know we're going to have to carry our conversation with our guests, into next week. But at the end of the day now, summarize just where we have been about Jerusalem, the embassy, the history. What do we learn from our conversation today?
Hopefully we've learned a lot. First of all, Jerusalem is, really, if you want to talk about it, and I like how Joel Rosenberg puts it, Jerusalem is the epicenter of what's going on. It is the epicenter spiritually. It is the epicenter geopolitically. It is the epicenter of the Bible. It is the epicenter of the world. And I really think it is, if you want to use this, the canary in the coal mine. You know, the canary is the most sensitive thing. They send the canaries down. If there's something wrong, it's going to affect the canary. Well, you start looking at Jerusalem. When things start happening in Jerusalem, things are going to be happening worldwide. It has a worldwide global impact, as we see. Why? Because the Jewish people, Israel, and as reflected in Jerusalem, is the center of God's plan of redemption in the Bible. And for us as Christians to ignore that, or to discount it, or to throw it away, we're really disconnecting ourselves from foundational truths, and we could find ourselves on the lying does. Just look at politics, I'm just saying, okay? And it may even hurt the person who is admitting the truth, and that's why the Constitution and the Bill of Rights has what? The Fifth Amendment. Remember? I plead the Fifth, which means what?
You don't have to self-incriminate.
I am not going to tell the truth about myself, because if I do, I'm going to wind up in the clink, and I don't want to be there. So you can take the Fifth. So is there a blessing to telling the truth?
I think there is. I think you don't have to have a good memory.
That's right. That's right. Somebody once said telling a lie is like pulling on a loose thread in a sweater.
Remembering things today is getting harder and harder for all of us. So much information, so many passwords, so much technology to master. It all seems a blur at times. But one thing we hope will never be a blur, and that is how much God loves you. The Bible tells us His mercy is new every morning, brewed special for your day. Thanks for listening.
This is Jay, your Truth Barista. Thanks for listening to the Truth Barista podcast. The best way to find out when a new podcast drops is through RSS feed. Go to our website, look for the RSS button, press it, and then enter your email. You'll be notified when a new podcast drops. Thanks for listening.